Hey, it's the plot of Season 2 of Star Trek Picard. Only 1/10 as long and 10,000 times better. This is a review of the classic Star Trek episode, The City on the Edge of Forever. If you have not seen this episode, and you don't want to know what happens in it, be warned, spoilers beyond this point. City on the Edge of Forever is the most classic of all classic Trek episodes, and rightly so. It tells a deeply affecting story that forces us to grapple with big existential questions. Questions like, what would you do if your friend got high and traveled back in time and changed history, and the only way to fix everything was to let your girlfriend get pancaked by a truck? Who among us hasn't stayed up late pondering that one? The Enterprise has followed a series of strange time distortions to their source at this uncharted planet. While in orbit, the ship is hit with a wave of turbulence that causes Sulu's console to blow up in his face. Just as well, the thing needed looked at anyway. That's the second time this season Sulu's complained about it being sluggish. McCoy arrives, fixes Sulu up with a dose of cordrazine from his handy-dandy hypo spray, but then accidentally injects himself with a gutful of the stuff after another burst of time turbulence throws him forward. All hyped up on space goofballs, McCoy becomes frightened and paranoid, convinced that he's surrounded by murderers and assassins. He flees the bridge and ultimately the ship, beaming down to the mysterious planet. A landing party, including Kirk, Spock, Scotty, Uhura, and a couple of nameless redshirts nobody could possibly care less about, follow McCoy down and begin a search. But before they find him, they find the source of the time distortions, a giant talking stone donut that calls itself the Guardian of Forever. It's a time portal. It says to Kirk, "Behold, I am a gateway to your past. Wouldn't you love to go back to the era of silent film?" Where would Star Trek time travel episodes be without stock footage? They find McCoy, but he's still a raving lunatic, out of his mind, tripping starballs. He breaks free and runs into the time portal, vanishing into the past. Right after that, the landing party notices that the Enterprise is gone. Huh? You think that's related to McCoy, the raving paranoiac, going back in time? Could be a coincidence. Spock and Kirk surmise that McCoy must have somehow altered history, causing Starfleet and therefore the Enterprise to no longer exist. The only way to put things back the way they were is to go back in time themselves, arrive at a point before McCoy gets there, find him, and stop him from doing whatever he does to change everything. So, they have the Guardian replay Earth history again, Spock watches to get the timing just right, and he and Kirk take the leap through the time donut into history. They arrive in New York City circa 1930. They steal some clothes so they can change out of their Starfleet uniforms. They get caught. Spock has to drop a cop with a Vulcan neck pinch, and they run away and take shelter in the basement of a rescue mission that just so happens to be run by Edith Keeler, who is a perfect angel who feels compassion for everyone and holds a firm conviction that someday soon humanity will turn its eyes toward outer space and grow beyond the poverty and war that are currently causing such misery. Kirk's like, I like her. Spock's like, she's okay. With help from Edith, they find work and a place to stay and settle in to wait for McCoy. They don't know precisely when or where the drugged-out doctor will arrive, but Spock estimates it will be soon. Spock's tricorder contains images he recorded from the Guardian, which can give them clues to what McCoy did and how history changed, but Spock can't access those files without a computer. So, since the Enterprise isn't available, he begins to build an expanded memory circuit using the technology available to him, vacuum tubes and such. One night, while sweeping up, Spock notices a couple of guys working with some precision tools. He's like, I want them tools. I must steal them tools. Kirk's like, are you sure that's necessary? And Spock's like, I was using a knife for a screwdriver in the last scene, dude. Yes. Spock steals the tools, but Edith finds out and confronts him about it. Spock says, okay, yes, I did steal the tools, but in my defense, I needed them for my hobby. Spock promises to return the tools when he's done with them, and Kirk backs him up, and Edith's like, okay, cool. Edith also observes that Kirk and Spock seem out of place here, like they don't belong, although she also says that wherever they are, Spock obviously belongs by Kirk's side. There are quite a few slash-fic writers who agree with you, Miss Keeler. Kirk and Edith start spending time together. Kirk likes her optimism, her faith in the future, her belief that humanity's salvation lies in the stars. Edith likes Kirk's casual way of hinting that he knows a thing or two about the future, such as quoting from a novelist who won't exist for another century or so, and who comes from a planet orbiting one of the stars in Orion's belt. It's an unconventional pickup line, but it works. Spock succeeds in creating a memory circuit to supplement the tricorder and gets a peek at those historical files he recorded from the Guardian, and it's bad news. The thing in history McCoy changed is Edith Keeler. And the way he changed it is he saved her life. In the original timeline, Edith Keeler was killed in a traffic accident. In the new timeline, after McCoy saved her, she became the leader of a national pacifistic movement that caused the United States to delay its entry into World War II, which in turn enabled the Nazis to develop the atomic bomb first, win the war, and conquer the world. Which was bad. Their path is now clear. They know what has to happen. Spock states it plainly. Edith Keeler must die. Kirk is in love with Edith, is the thing. The whole she has to die to fix history deal doesn't really work for him. I'm not worried, though. Spock's sitting there like, I'll kill her. Meanwhile, McCoy arrives in the past. He's still pretty messed up, but he's starting to come down. He remains convinced that he's being chased by assassins, but he no longer assumes that everyone he meets is one of them. That's progress. He meets one of the down-and-outs from the mission and passes out in front of him, giving the poor guy a chance to steal McCoy's phaser and accidentally vaporize himself. McCoy wakes up, staggers into the rescue mission, and meets Edith, who leads him to a cot in a back room where he passes out again. Before too long, McCoy wakes up, and he's back to his old self. Mercifully, time constraints and the sense of propriety maintained by 1960s television spare us having to watch the presumably inhuman levels of vomiting and diarrhea McCoy experienced. I'm just guessing withdrawal from future space drugs isn't pleasant. Edith drops in to check on McCoy, then says she has to leave because her boyfriend is taking her to see a Clark Gable movie. McCoy's like, who the fuck is Clark Gable? She's like, oh, you, and leaves. Edith is outside walking with Kirk, and she says, we'd better hurry, or we'll be late for that Clark Gable movie. And Kirk says, who the fuck is Clark Gable? And Edith says, you sound like Dr. McCoy. And Kirk's like, McCoy? He's here? Spock! Kirk runs back across the street. Spock arrives, and a second later, McCoy emerges from the mission. The three friends are reunited, and for a moment, everything is great. Then, Edith starts across the street. A truck rounds the corner and heads straight for her. Kirk starts out into the street, but freezes. McCoy tries to push past Kirk, but Kirk grabs him, holds him, turns away from the street, and can only listen as the truck hits Edith and kills her. You deliberately stopped me, Jim. I could have saved her, McCoy says. Do you know what you just did? Kirk, silent, numb, walks away. Spock says, he knows, Doctor. He knows. They return through the Guardian to their own time. From the landing party's perspective, they've only been gone for a moment. The Enterprise is back. History has been restored. Want to go again? The Guardian asks. But Kirk turns away, mutters, let's get the hell out of here. And the landing party beams up, leaving the Guardian as they found it. So, just take a second and imagine how bizarre the last few days of Edith Keeler's life are. She catches these two weirdos in stolen clothes in the basement of her rescue mission, one of whom references the words of writers from 100 years in the future who live on other planets, the other of whom is apparently a radio hobbyist so dedicated that he's willing to steal tools from people in order to pursue it. Then, this other weirdo staggers into the mission, drugged out and mumbling about people being after him. He dries out, starts talking about old Earth and stuff like that, kind of like the first two weirdos. Then, it turns out he and the first two weirdos, one of whom Edith is now dating, all know each other somehow. Getting introduced to the grill of that speeding truck is the least unusual thing that happened to her that week. At the beginning, I joked about how Star Trek Picard took an entire 10-episode season to get through the same basic plot that this episode covers in less than an hour, but the economical storytelling of City on the Edge of Forever is, seriously, one of its most impressive qualities, and you don't need to compare it to Picard or any other show to recognize that. Look at how much ground this episode covers, and how efficiently it covers it. Pacing is a recurring problem in classic Star Trek episodes. Shows frequently feel padded or stretched out as though they barely had enough to fill out their required running time. That is not the case with City, which manages to take us through a story that is complex emotionally and philosophically, as well as in terms of its plot, in a single hour. It does this by knowing how to get the most out of every second. We establish where the Enterprise is, why it's here, and why the crew has to beam down to the planet by the end of the teaser. We introduce the Guardian and see McCoy break loose and jump through, changing history by the end of the first act. In Act 2, we get Kirk and Spock's decision to follow McCoy back to repair history, their arrival in 1930s New York, their theft of their clothes, an encounter with the cop, their meeting with Edith, they're getting jobs at the rescue mission, establishing Edith's utopian worldview, Spock realizing he needs to build a computer to access the tricorder, Spock stealing the tools to help with that, Kirk and Edith going for a walk and obviously growing closer, and Spock getting enough of a glimpse at the tricorder's records to figure out that history hinges on whether or not Edith Keeler lives or dies. That's only half of the episode. Kirk and Spock realizing that Edith has to die, McCoy arriving and recovering, the tension between Kirk and Spock over whether or not Kirk will be able to let Edith die, and finally Edith's death and the resolution. That's all yet to come in the second half. This episode is positively packed with plot and character development, and it moves through everything with a briskness that is exhilarating. Spock at one point refers to time being like a river, and the pacing of the episode creates the impression that our characters are being pushed ahead by the rushing current of that river, carried inevitably toward their destiny. Sure, there's enough here that you could probably slow things down, expand it into a decent two-parter. It might be nice if Kirk and Edith's romance had a bit more time to breathe, but then again, the episode gets so much out of a single conversation between them, out of brief glances at one another, a holding of hands, a kiss, the way Kirk talks about her to Spock, that I'm not sure if giving it more time would have necessarily improved it. For the story to work, I need to believe that Kirk really loves Edith, and that it's truly painful to him to have to let her die in order to serve the greater good. When I watch the episode, I do believe it. I don't need more. It's a great Kirk episode. Kirk gets the romance. Kirk's decisions are the really important ones. And Kirk and Shatner are great in it. But it's a fantastic Spock and McCoy episode as well. City reinforces the bond between Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, even though the three of them are separated for most of the episode, with Kirk and Spock on one path and McCoy on another, only intersecting right before the climax. The friendship shared between them is obvious and serves to deepen the story and what's at stake. Kirk and Spock are trying to put history right, yes, but they're also trying to find their friend and bring him home. The plot would have been the same if, say, Scotty had gone through the Guardian instead of McCoy, but the story would have packed less of a punch. It's hard to imagine the reunion between Kirk, Spock, and Scotty landing as well as the one we get between Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. Kirk and Spock like Scotty. He's their friend. He's one of the gang. But he's not their bestie. He's not McCoy. Plus, come on, how much fun is DeForest Kelley having as McCoy here? He gets to scream and carry on and run around the ship. He gets to knock out Chief Kyle with a double karate chop. Chop, chop! He gets to have an emotional breakdown over how barbaric 20th century medicine is. And then he gets to wake up and be grateful to Edith for her help and remind us all of what a decent, likable guy he is. Quite a range for one character in one episode, and Kelly pulls it off without even seeming like he's trying. As for the third member of the trio, while there are episodes of classic Trek that focus more centrally on Spock, there aren't many where Spock or Leonard Nimoy are better than this one. This is a show that really drives home the dynamic between Kirk and Spock. Kirk knows what the right thing to do is, but he also knows what his heart is telling him. Spock is the voice of reason, the dispassionate one, the one telling him, if you do what your heart tells you to do, Nazis are going to take over the world. He's not without sympathy. Nimoy shows us through his performance in a couple of scenes that Spock understands that Kirk is conflicted about what has to happen to Edith. His delivery of Spock's final line, "He knows, Doctor, he knows," is rich with understated compassion. But Spock is also absolutely uncompromising regarding what needs to happen. When he tells Kirk, Jim, Edith Keeler must die, he isn't speaking as a cold, calculating computer who doesn't recognize the human element in all of this. His tone is frank, but with something underneath that is almost gentle. He's speaking to a friend, telling his friend what he needs to hear. The other major character in the episode is Edith herself, and Joan Collins does a good job of creating someone I believe Captain Kirk would fall in love with. Yes, she's beautiful, a beauty underlined by the fact that she's nearly always lit like an angel, and most of her close-ups are in ethereal soft focus, but we also see that she's a good person. She runs a soup kitchen, and she genuinely seems to care about the people on her street who have been laid low by the Depression. Here and there, she does come across as a bit too idealistic, or at least too simplistic in her idealism, and for whatever reason, Collins chooses to deliver Edith's big speech about how someday humanity will travel to space and figure out how to solve all its problems as though she's coming up with these ideas as she's saying them, which doesn't really play since it's obvious she's thought about this stuff a lot and given similar speeches to the patrons of her soup kitchen before, but overall, she's good. What we have here is an engaging, well-put-together adventure story with a complicated plot, but which is ultimately character-driven, that ends in tragedy. True, because of the rigidly episodic nature of the series, neither Edith's sacrifice nor Kirk's wrenching choice to allow that sacrifice wind up meaning very much in future episodes, but they mean something in this episode. Shatner, often rightly criticized as a ham, shows us what it means to Kirk with his choked, whispered utterance of, "Let's get the hell out of here" at the end, communicating heartbreak and anger and resentment and more, all in those few words. I know there are some folks who object to what they read as the message of the episode. Edith Keeler, the peacekeeper, the pacifist, must die in order for history to unfold as it should. I understand the objections from that point of view, but personally, I don't read the episode that way. I don't think the point of Edith's story is war is better than peace. When Kirk and Spock learn this about Edith, Kirk says she was right, peace was the way, and Spock confirms she was right, but at the wrong time. It's not that wanting peace is wrong or dangerous, it's that sometimes things aren't that simple. The Nazis had to be stopped for there to ever have been any hope of peace. But in a broader sense, I think the episode is telling us something about the dangers of focusing too much on what happened and not enough on what's happening. Kirk is transfixed by the Guardian of Forever, by the images of the past, by the possibility of traveling back in time to prevent McCoy from accidentally overdosing on cordrazine. It's while Kirk and Spock are thus distracted that McCoy breaks loose and leaps through the time portal. McCoy travels to the past and saves the life of a good person, but inadvertently destroys the future he knows. The past is what it is, for better and for worse. It can be learned from, but it can't be changed. What's done is done. You don't make a better future by changing the past. You make a better future by changing the present, by making new history that hasn't been written yet. Sounds like Star Trek to me. Those are my thoughts on The City on the Edge of Forever. What do you think of this episode? Please share your thoughts with me in the comments. If you'd like to support this channel, and I sure wish you would, if you can afford it, you can do so by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Steve Shives, becoming a channel member by clicking the join button, or by making a one-time gift by clicking the thanks button, or via PayPal or Venmo. Links are in the description. Don't forget to join me and my best friend Jason Harding this weekend for our review of Episode 2 of Season 2 of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Our review will be up sometime on Saturday, and please come back next week for another retro review. This batch dedicated to time travel episodes continues as we move from Star Trek the original series to Star Trek The Next Generation for a review of the two-parter Time's Arrow. I'll see you next week for that. Thanks for watching, and take care, everybody.